When you think of Halo, you think of Spartans versus Elites, fighting it out on random locations in the galaxy, and of Master Chief, the one-man army, except for when he's a four-man army, single-handedly, though again sometimes four-handedly, wiping out hordes of aliens, while all of his allies die at his feet in a puddle of their own urine and failure. But have you ever taken a step back and thought about those behind the scenes? The ones pulling the strings, the ones ordering the entire UNSC Navy to line up in front of Master Chief and his three identical brothers as a massive human shield? That's where Halo Wars comes in, the game that lets you, yes you, be the one who orders a squad of Marines to take on 10 Wraiths, then march them to their death on some godforsaken rock. The game takes place in the early days of the UNSC and Covenant War, before you had to remember each and instead could visit there on holiday. I mean, if you wanted to. Pretty sure it's not been colonised yet, but you know, hunt ostriches at your own risk. The game centres around a few key areas and characters, some of whom you can play as. In a story mode, you don't really play as any commander in particular, instead you utilise various commanders' units at different points in the story. In multiplayer however, there are 6 different commanders to play as, along with 2 separate teams in the base game. Now each player starts in the same way in most games, with a base and a scout unit. Players have to build buildings to gain money and increase their tech level, which determines what units, buildings and upgrades may be purchased. Units also have to be trained from certain buildings as well. There are resource crates and various structures around the map to provide various bonuses, however usually you do have to fight their guardians, so rebels, blood and sentinels. Each player starts with one base, and must build buildings and assign slots, but can choose which slots to use for what buildings. The more buildings on a base, the stronger the base is, and the more of a certain building on a base, the more productive that building is. For example, increased unit creation speed or resource gathering. There are other set base points that can be captured for use, but again you would have to fight for most of them. Each player chooses from one of 6 commanders before the game starts, each with their own unique units and mega units, which are just essentially powered up versions of the main units, and of course their own unique bonuses. These commanders are Sergeant John Generic Sergeant Guy Forge, who is also a commander somehow, Professor Ellen Anders, the scientist lady and damsel in distress, Captain James Gregory Cutter, also known as the only UNSC guy who should actually have command over an entire army. You of course have the Covenant commanders as well. First of all, there's the Arbiter, no not that one, the Prophet of Regrets, as in you'll regret not equipping your chair with fuel rod cannons, and the Brute Chieftain. He has a hammer. Every commander has their own unique flair for combat, and there are several differences between not only the commanders themselves, but also differences between the Covenant and UNSC armies in general. The Covenant armies tend to have more units, and upgrades are performed in different ways. You may think this is a bit unfair until you realise that UNSC troops tend to be better in combat. The UNSC sends in Marines as their core infantry, whereas the Covenant send in grunts. As I mentioned earlier, each commander has their own unique abilities. For example, Captain Carr can send in squads of ODST troops from orbit, and can also rain down Mac Daddy blasts, whereas Anders can freeze units, I guess. The Covenant leaders, however, do not hide in their ships and order from above like their UNSC counterparts. They instead appear as powerful units, and their powers act as unique unit abilities, such as energy wells and powerful energy beams. Since they're units, they can also be upgraded to become more powerful, but if defeated, they would have to be summoned again. Of course, Covenant troops can be teleported to their leader, so that helps keeping them alive. The best part about the multiplayer is that teams can be made of combinations of any leaders. So for example, Forge, Cutter and the Prophet can fit against Cutter, the Arbiter and the Chieftain. Of course, most matches are usually between Forge, Forge and Forge against Forge, Forge and Forge. The reason for this is because he's just so damn overpowered. And therein lies the issue with the game. The game is just simply not balanced. Now there is meant to be a rock, paper, scissors dynamic with the gameplay, which there kind of is. But then of course Forge just comes along and fucks everything up. You see, it's meant to be aircraft beats tank, which beats infantry, which beats aircraft. Then of course there are other units that cover weaknesses. For example, Hunters are anti-vehicle infantry, and Wolverines are anti-aircraft vehicles. And then Forge just comes in with his unique tank upgrade of the Grizzly and just fucks everything up. You need to dedicate your entire army to counter these things, and anti-tank units just simply don't do well against Grizzlies. The Uber unit for the UNSC can counter it, but you have to be max tech level to get it. It uses a lot of unit space, and it's slow as hell. It's a big plane. I mean, yeah, the Covenant gets a goddamn Scarab or two, but UNSC is stuck with a plane. The reason Forge is so overpowered isn't just down to his tanks, which are ridiculous, but also because his counter, aircraft, suck in Halo Wars. No, seriously, they suck. They take more time to build and can be easily overwhelmed by basic low tier infantry. So, some advice if you do decide to play the game, don't play as Anders. Seriously, she specialises in aircraft, and even then, they suck. And now on to the single player. It's okay. It's not as good as most Halo games, but it is 2-player. The issue with that though is that both players share everything. The same bases, the same money, they'll even share the same population limit, which is 20 initially. So, 2 players have to work together to manage the same bases while controlling different units, which can of course be traded between players. It's a co-op game with emphasis on the co-op, as me and a good friend of mine discovered while trying to beat the game on Legendary. Oh, and if you're watching, Jamie, Forge is down. That's a little inside joke there. You probably won't get it though. So the story is pretty standard for a Halo game. Humans under attack, humans fight off aliens, aliens fight Relic and take it, humans want to blow up Relic, then the flood happens, humans win, the end. Still, the game has some great moments, such as defending a civilian population as they evacuate a city under attack by the Covenant. And of course there's also the moment you have to take down a Super Scarab, which can't move, but is firing out of control, destroying everything in its line of fire. The campaign has a lot of different objectives and isn't always the same scenario of kill all aliens. There are also a lot of collectibles to find in the levels, and in typical Halo fashion, there's also skills that can be collected which modify the game experience in some way. Overall, I'd say Halo Wars is a great game despite its clearly evident flaws, and sadly due to the nature of the series, it's not as popular as the rest of the game in its series due to the different style of gameplay. In my opinion though, it's definitely one of the most underrated Halo games out of there, and I guess I'm not alone in that belief, as there is a sequel on the way next year. But before it comes out, I would strongly recommend playing Halo Wars 1 on the 360 if you can.